Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Time, Money, Resources, where I'm interviewing different CEOs and senior leaders on how to stay smart and stay lean. I'm super excited about today's guest, Manohar Kamat. He is a senior client partner at The Nerdery. The Nerdery is a digital business agency focusing on strategy design and digital technology. So we're going to have a fun conversation on innovation, and I can't wait to dive in. Hi,
Thank
Manohar.
you very much. Thanks, Taylor.
So let's start a little bit more about your background, kind of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so just to be very succinct here, I started my career in technology, as a developer a while ago, and over time just got excited about how technology applies to business and the future of humanity at large. So over the last few decades, I would say I have been very much interested in understanding the possibilities of how technology and the design and anything adjacent to that applies to businesses, economies at a macro level, as well as human element. So when the COVID hit, I was very in a way panicky, but at the same time, trying to think about what this could mean for humanity at large, but also businesses that operate within the parameters or the bounds of various economies. So a brief background, and also just want to let you know that I'm with Nerdery, which is a digital consulting company here, both in Chicago and also headquartered in Minneapolis. I'm a senior client partner who gets to talk with a lot of clients and understand their problems and help them, steer, not just this pandemic, but any other challenges that they see over time.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to have you. So I want to get into
Thank
the
you.
first question, which is what are some less obvious disruptors that you're seeing as a result of COVID?
If you were talking about disruptors in terms of just technology or just in general, one of the things, and again, I kind of I've thought about this question a lot, only because I kind of tend to keep a log of, what could happen in the next few months or couple, over a long range of time, just to kind of look and see if my thinking was right, if my, thinking along those things were valid. The one thing I would say, this may not seem like a disruption, but I'm already seeing some indicators in the marketplace, is human behavior. Because with any calamity of this scale, and I also go back to 9/11 when it was a big disruptor for us. Although this is probably a much larger disruptor, for human life, is how do human behaviors change? So if I think back to my days in India when I was growing up, a lot of things we did was around conserving resources, right? So for example, water was not as available as it's in the Western world. Electricity, money, of course, right? So as I see this pandemic, one of the things I see this as a disruptor is how humans mostly in the Western world will now have to think of conserving things. At the beginning of the COVID, you probably saw this headlines, right? Everyone's running out to, shopping, basically like grocery stores and buying everything that they can, only because, we spend a lot of, or I would even call it waste a lot of, resources that we had or we had. And I think with time, I think the importance or criticality of those resources might be more obvious, only because one, you cannot go out as much as you wanted to, like earlier. And two, only because the supply chains have been disrupted, you don't have the supply of those things just like we had. So I think to answer your question in another way, these are definitely disruptors, but you probably see these trends, over time, right? So maybe in the past couple of weeks, you've only seen, grocery stores being overrun by customers. But I think if you give it a couple of months or maybe a couple of years, you will see that there's probably a radical shift of how people buy things, and consume things, more than just buy things. So I would say that is probably going to be, in my opinion, the less obvious. But with maybe time, it's not going to be as less obvious anymore.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm like, with all the, quote unquote diet fads over the past, few years where they're like, you have to eat paleo, you have to eat keto. Now it's going to be like, it's the COVID conservation diet.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be like,
Yep.
grow your own bread. It's non-GMO.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll give you like another data point. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there might be a lot of those things, happening in the time frame as we're talking about right now. But if you just look at the trends, again, I don't know who I was reading yesterday. It might be CNBC or a couple of other websites. People are already hoarding cash. For example, one thing that happens when a calamity like this strikes is you have a lot of uncertainty, right? So anyone, would want to save, not no discretionary spending, hoard as much cash as you can. And then you see this, being transferred over time, it becomes almost like a normal, So if you think back to 9/11, before 9/11, you could go to airport, go to any gate, you know, without any kind of a security, without need for boarding pass or any kind of a check. And post 9/11, you cannot go in without a boarding pass. So, but now we treat it as a normal, right? So for us to kind of go through a TSA check, in 5 minutes is almost like a luxury now, right? So exactly. So I think like having cash as a resource, which is really critical in any time, is going to be, I think, manifested, will manifest itself in various ways over time. And I think like another disruptor could be like how we kind of do business. Like what you mentioned, it's going to be online. Most likely. But you also need, just because everyone's going online doesn't mean that you'll get things online. You go to Amazon now. Amazon Prime used to take 2 days. Now they're promising 1 week.
Yeah.
So I think supply chains have been hit enough that those disruptions will probably like take some time to settle. And maybe who knows in 1 year, what the Amazon Prime means to everyone. It might mean 7 days, not 2 days.
I'm still
So
waiting for drone delivery. I'm like, come on, guys, you can do it.
yeah, well, it's so funny that you bring drone delivery because of two things. Because of the airspace, like anyone who needs a drone delivery needs to be licensed from a FAA because they're probably in a potential path of a plane. But the travel being disrupted as it is right now, who knows how long it'll be before the travel can get up to 100%. So maybe drone delivery, it's the best time for drone delivery because there's no aircrafts flying as much.
I
and
think so.
and if you think about this, the best person to operate a drone to be FAA licensed could be a pilot who probably is not flying at this time.
I totally agree. I'm like, come on, guys, you can do it.
Right. So I think like postulating some of these things is not very difficult, right? You kind of take what's happening in the economy. People who had certain jobs that are not doing things what they did, and if you just turn it back and say, oh, okay, how can we make these people productive? And I think that then some of these disruptions will be very apparent.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great segue into the next question that I wanted to ask, which are what innovations have you seen in the past 2 months, either from like quick pivots, new solutions, things that you might be like super excited about? Like I saw a article on Forbes talking about the like robotic hamburger flippers that work for $3 an hour and operate 24/7. And I was like, that's an interesting innovation that
Yep.
reduce the risks for people having to go in and also can maximize worker productivity. So are there any things that you've seen over the past couple months that you're really excited about?
I've not seen anything at this point in terms of like personally firsthand, but I am tuned to a couple of people that I've been talking to. So I'll just give you an example. Not saying that McDonald's is doing this, but think about McDonald's having carry out or like the drive-through windows, right? Earlier you would have a capacity for 2 cars to pass at any given point, right? Now with COVID, you probably have to expand that. So if I was McDonald's, I'll probably be innovating along those lines where, just the fact that I cannot go to a restaurant and just eat at the restaurant. I probably have to go wait outside, wait for that pickup or the thing to be delivered to me, in person, right? I think like, innovations around those things will probably pick up very, quickly, because again, this is just a matter of time when you will see this. For example, someone like McDonald's, who already had the infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
to, kind of do this, like, drive through thing, right? Where, think about, you just like, place an order and you drive through, you have a car, then you just wait, and they just give it to you in your drive through window. You don't even have to go through a drive through. So I think, like, I have not seen the innovation, to that level at this point, but it's not very hard to fathom. Um, the one thing I'll say, this innovation probably came from other countries. Think about contact tracing. So if you think about Singapore or Korea or South Korea, where people got ahead of kind of understanding where they got the COVID from, if they got COVID at some point, because the smartphones have already proliferated those countries, right? More than it's in the US. So they had the infrastructure already. All they had to do was plug in something and say, okay, if you have this app and somebody gets COVID, it'll alert you if you are likely to get one. So the one thing that I've been thinking about, and the reason that I'm thinking about this particular innovation, is kind of going back to that 9/11 argument, where certain things were were normal before, and some things changed, and now it's a new normal. I see this innovation, like the whole contact tracing, to be a normal at some point. As much as we probably think, oh, that's a invasion of my civil liberties, or invasion into my private space, I can see that being an innovation that will essentially gain more ground. Because if you think about it, if as long as I anonymize your name and personal details, all I need is a phone that is sending some beacon, and as I'm kind of coming in touch with other people who have phones with this kind of apps, I'm exchanging information. At some point, if one of them gets some disease, I'm not saying COVID, like I'm talking about 20 years from now, 30 years from now, right? You could potentially alert a whole bunch of people, just like how we have Amber Alerts now, right? Saying that your likelihood of getting something because somebody in your contact network, has this, is very highly, it's very effective, right? So I see that as a potential, almost like a feature built into phones going forward. So, like you have NFCs where you can pay for your Starbucks using, contactless card, right?
Which is great.
Exactly. Like, so, but, just taking that one particular example, and all you have to do is innovate slightly, right? All you're doing is enabling phones to talk to each other without knowing who you are. I don't even need to know that, this person is so-and-so, right? And let's say if one of them catches something, all that the health workers have to do is, okay, we know how you have your phone. It's been on for whatever long, and let's alert, I don't know, some kind of a boundary within in the next, second, third degree level, kind
Yeah.
of like a LinkedIn. It'll
Right.
be a
Well, I
LinkedIn
guess
of
new LinkedIn
pandemic.
notifications.
Yeah, it's exactly like it's almost like a LinkedIn. So, what's the degree of separation between you and the person who is a carrier of the disease? So, I think I see that as not, and that's, I think I would bet, in a way, $1 if I were to bet, that might be the norm.
I don't disagree with that at all. So what are new opportunities and ways that companies can innovate that they should be thinking about right now? I think we've kind of gotten out of the denial phase. Like we know, I think we're in more of an acceptance phase that people are, that we're like, okay, this is life now, or at least some form of life now. And so as companies slowly start to kind of get back online, what are some ways that they should be thinking about innovation?
Um, I'll probably like to start off with saying innovation should never stop, regardless of what happens, right? So just because you had a pandemic doesn't make this any better time or worse time to innovate. So to me, innovation has always been a constant thing that your companies have to do, because market conditions change regardless, right? So, if it was not COVID, it would have been something else. Maybe your competitor had a leg up on you, or, some things change the economy. But I think the scale is probably different. Now there's an urgency of, kind of innovating. So I think I'll say that as a preface, right? So to say that, innovation should not wait for some major disruption to happen before you start this. I think what I have seen, and I think what a lot of companies are seeing, is people who had invested in a lot of, I would call it less of a digital thing, more about innovation in technology,
Mm-hmm.
where, for example, like, as simple as, having a collaboration platform for your coworkers to work together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus having them to come into office, is a great, if you already invested there, great, you already have a leg up. If you haven't, then you probably should. Not because, like, I'm not saying that, working from home will be the norm,
Mm-hmm.
but this becomes almost like a backup plan, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So think about the next few months, as different states open up, different countries open up, there will still be a tendency for people not to take public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So, people will still be afraid that, if they take public transportation, they might be at a elevated risk of getting something like COVID. So to do that, if you already have built up the infrastructure to support your company to work seamlessly,
Mm-hmm.
outside of your boundaries of office, then you have essentially done a great thing, And if you haven't, I think you should. So I think, like, I would call that as, again, it's not an innovation. It's definitely something that I would say going forward will be almost infrastructure. It's almost like having electricity,
Mm-hmm.
in your office, if you don't have air conditioning, right? So I would say that is probably a thing. And in terms of innovation, I think one thing I tell my clients is whatever will be the normal will be a normal that no one has seen,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, again, I can speculate. We can probably be close to the predictions, but it's a normal that we don't know of at this point. So the the playing field has been in a way leveled.
Mm-hmm.
So whoever was a laggard initially, or in the previous times, probably still has a time to get ahead,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they innovate in these times and are smart about their investment, smart about how they think in the future. If you don't, there's two levels of threat. One, people who are already prepared with this kind of infrastructure to innovate will probably get there first,
Mm-hmm.
and now you have to catch up to them, and now you have to catch up to the new normal. So I think it almost behooves companies that were not thinking about innovation or did not have the infrastructure to innovate to almost put those processes now, because whether it is COVID, retracting it, or receding in 2021 or 2024, you have multiple opportunities to, compete.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
when it recedes fully, you have again, exactly. I'm hoping it's really quickly as well,
Yeah.
but you have an opportunity to again, get a leg up against your competition.
Absolutely. So speaking of staying smart, I'm going to get into rapid fire. So
Okay.
time, money, resources. Where should people be thinking about spending their time or investing their time, spending or investing their money, or adding strategic resources or using their resources more wisely?
Yeah, I would say, like, spring towards the latter. Don't spend wisely, save even more wisely. Spend a lot of time with your family, because I think the time that you spend with your family, you have an opportunity now that we didn't have before, just because people are not traveling as much, not commuting as much. Now it's your time to bond with your family if you haven't already done so. And in terms of spending, I would say, um, I think this is probably a great, lesson that I learned personally in the 2008 recession, which is, and I actually learned it from, of all the places, Northwestern University. I didn't go to school there, but I was just touring their campus at some point. 2008, 2009, they were building their infrastructure like crazy. But if you think about that, they were actually fundraising in good economy and spending their money in the bad economy. So in a way, if you have capital expenditure, or like, if you have the money and if you have like a big ticket item that you want to spend on, this might be a good time to spend it, as long as you know that you will be spending that money, because you probably have a lot of deals to be had. You probably will have a lot more people willing to do that work and for cheaper, and just because there's more competition, you probably will have a better hand in negotiations. So I think if you have the money, again, if you have the money, that's the preface. I think this is a good time to spend it on things that you thought you wanted to, like think about a remodeling project that you wanted to do at the house.
Hashtag
But
quarantine projects.
I'm sorry?
Hashtag quarantine projects.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing is I think this is going back to the disruption and the human behaviors I was telling you about. I think people will actually get more resourceful, having lived with this. I think there is a huge opportunity for people to reskill themselves or, skill themselves in things that they thought they would never do. You were never a handy person. Now you probably will be, because guess what? You can save that money on, spending on, fixing a little thing, a faucet in your home, or things around the house that you never thought you could do, and you relied on another person to spend that money on. Now it's a great chance for you to do that, because going back to your spend versus save, this is a great saver. If you already have skills, people will probably also cook more at home, given the restaurants are closed. So that's another skill you could also build that will last for a long time, even post-COVID.
Absolutely. I'm like, YouTube's been my savior.
Oh yes, that's right. Right. I mean, I think funny enough that you mentioned YouTube, because YouTube has been a great resource for a lot of people, right? And just kind of going with that flow, I think people will have to almost skill themselves in multiple or master multiple skills, because as you have seen, a lot of people who are not employed at this point probably need to pick up another skill that they could be productive. So I think it just kind of makes people multi-skilled, if anything. So I think answering your question in a more direct way, if you have the money and resources, this is your time to spend it on something that you always wanted, in terms of remodeling and those kind of things. But otherwise, I will advise anyone, save as much money as you can, save as much cash as you can, and try to gain a skill that you can save your money as well. So because we don't know when the normalcy will return. But if it takes longer than we anticipate or we hope for, you're probably in a better condition. At least you're not stressing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and being on my segment. I'm super excited, and this was an awesome conversation.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Taylor. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely.